Well, hi, and welcome back to our study in 1 Peter. And we're going to be continuing on in 1 Peter chapter 2. In fact, today we're going to be looking at verses 13 through 17. And as you recall, last time we were together, Peter was telling us that we needed to live like we were exiles in this world, because this isn't our home, that heaven really is. And that we need to bear witness to the gospel. And we need to live in ways that are pleasing to God. Now, starting today in verse 13, and really going all the way through the beginning part of chapter 3 into verse 12, Peter's going to start telling us how we should be living. And he's going to talk about us being good citizens, how we should be good slaves, and think of that really as employees, and we'll talk more about that next time. Good husbands and wives. But today we're going to talk about being good citizens as we look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, which I will now read. Be subject, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to the governors as sent by him, to punish those who do evil, and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should be put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, but not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but for living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the emperor. So you see here that Peter is really saying that we need to honor the emperor and the governors that he sends. And remember that Peter wrote this really during a time of high persecution for the Christians. Again, early on we said that this was probably during the reign of Nero, who were using Christians to setting them on fire to light the gardens at night. And that Nero was trying to use Christians as a scapegoat for some of the things that had gone really bad in Rome at the time. And Paul says the same thing about honoring the government in chapter 13, which was also written at the same time during the persecutions. Peter then goes on to say that the government is the one who should be punishing the bad people. Paul also makes that same argument in Romans 13. In fact, he says that we should not be looking for vengeance ourselves, that in fact, leave that up to God. And one of the instruments that God uses is he puts the government in place to punish bad people. But not only should the government punish bad people, they should also praise people that are doing good. Right? So the government should deter bad behavior, but they should also encourage good behavior. And then again in chapter 13 of Romans, Paul tells us that nobody gets their power. No one gets their power, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really matter. You don't get your power unless it comes from God. And that God will use those people, no matter whether they're good rulers or bad rulers, right, to fulfill his plan. Peter goes on to then tell us that we need to live good, godly lives. And as we do that we will silence our accusers. And we talked a little bit about that last week. But again, Peter says it again, right? That we need to act the way God would have us act. And when we do that, people have nothing bad to say about us. And what he's saying is hey, that we are free, right? We are no longer under the slavery of sin, that in fact, we are free, but don't use that freedom to sin. That we should be living those godly lives. Then he finishes up this section by saying, hey, we need to honor those who are in power, but to fear God, right? And that God always needs to come first. And so we need to obey the government, except for when the government tells us to disobey God. Now, when we look at some of our always principles, because God has sent every ruler, right, to do his bidding, regardless whether he was a good ruler or a bad ruler, and we've already really kind of said that. But we need to pay honor to the office that has been set up. Now, we also need to understand that God is the ultimate authority, not the government. And that we need to ultimately, we will all be judged by God, and we need to answer to Him. So again, our two always principles is that God has set up these governments. He's allowed them to take root. He has allowed people to be placed in power. And then we also need to understand that God is the ultimate authority. And He raises up kingdoms and He destroys kingdoms. And so let us always put our trust in God. So now, how is this passage speaking to you today? I think that there's a lot to be said with this coronavirus happening right now, and government's authority and what we should and shouldn't be doing. But how is it applying to you specifically now? How is this passage talking to you? Let me know. Send a comment. Send an email. It's always good to know that you're listening. And when we come back next week, we're going to talk about how servants need to be subject to their masters. So until then, until Wednesday, have a great day, be safe, and go with the peace that only God can provide. Amen.